Hello and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator and the Curated Connections Library. We're here to talk about teaching art with purpose and inspiration, from the daily delights of creativity to the messy mishaps that come with being a teacher. Whether you're driving home from school or cleaning up your classroom for the 15th time today, take a second, take a deep breath, relax those shoulders, and let's get started. Hello, everybody. It's Cindy Ingram from Art Class Curator. And today, what we're going to talk about on the podcast is something that kind of comes up a lot. Since I started doing this work, I started Art Class Curator in 2014. And I have heard this again and again and again from teachers who have not really tried the types of lessons that we do, but they come to me replying to emails or social media posts or anything, and they say, this is too much for my students. They can't do this. It's too high level. The conversations are too much. They're not going to connect with art, with works of art. They can't handle any of it. And every single time I think, oh, you're wrong. You're just wrong. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is your kids can do this. They can do this type of work. And we've been having a couple episodes now of really talking about what Art Connection does for us. So I talked with Jen Easterling a few weeks ago about some of the art connections that our students have made and some of the stories of lessons that we've given in our class, artworks that we've shown in our class that went really well and that our students really connected with. And then last week I talked about the transformational power of art and what it has to offer you and your students. And if all of that wasn't enough, today we're going to talk about this myth that your students can't handle this sort of higher level thinking, deeper thinking, and art connection. So before we really talk about the myths of, the overall myth that your students can't handle this, but some kind of smaller myths about, they don't have the ability to connect with works of art, they're not going to know what to do, they're not interested, that it's too advanced, all of those things we're going to talk about in this episode. But before we do that, the type of lesson that I'm talking about, if you don't know what I mean, is not an art history lecture. I am talking about what we call a Sparkworks lesson. And this is actually the first time I've said those words out loud to you. You'll learn a lot more about it next week. But we have been releasing at Art Class Curator and the Curated Connections Library every single month, all the way back to September of 2017. So this is our 5th school year of releasing these lessons. We've released 4 new artwork lessons per month for the last 4 years. And in these lessons, we give you discussion questions for the artwork, engaging activities like poems or kinesthetic activities or compare contrast or group activities or Sky's the limit, tons of different activities. And then related art projects that you can do related to the theme or the media or the emotions, anything like that. And we also give you information about the artist, the talking points for the artwork, as well as all the resources that you need. So the PowerPoints, the worksheets, etc. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. So you can imagine one of these lessons being, you show a work of art and then you discuss it with your students and using the discussion questions that we provide, and then you do some sort of activity. So, or you could do the activity first or only the activity, whatever you want to do. But, one example would be we've done a lesson on Molly Crabapple's artwork called Portraits of Myself and Lola Montez with Words from Our Contemporaries. I don't remember the exact title. I talked about it in the podcast a few weeks ago with the social emotional learning episode. They look at that artwork, talk about it, but what we have in their little worksheets with faces on them. And then you can have students write compliments to each other. You can, there's sort of activities related to that. So you take the theme and then you do something kind of related to it. Or maybe there is something on symbolism. So I know off the top of my head, we have a Benin sculpture plaque from the Kingdom of Benin, and there's a symbolism worksheet. So it points to the different elements of the artwork, and then the students can theorize about what those symbols might represent. There's Van Gogh's sunflowers, and we have multiple versions of his sunflowers, and the students compare and contrast. On the Van Gogh line, because it's in my head, there's the Van Gogh shoes, and then you can write about, kind of like a walk a mile in your shoes thing. So, lots and lots of different types of activities with different types of learning that takes place. When we have activities where you think about the five senses, if you step into the artwork, what would you taste, smell, hear, or feel? Lots of different ways to engage with works of art. So again, we'll talk more about Sparkworks next week. We just have called them Sparkworks, but I'll tell you a lot more about that next week. So that's the kind of lesson that I'm talking about. So the difficulty level ranges, with the artworks. There are some artworks that are more sensitive subjects that you might not want to show your younger kids. There are activities that involve a little bit more writing. So if you open up one of those, you're like, oh, that's too much. But all of these are super flexible, and they're meant to be taken and tailored to your students. Every classroom is different. Every group of students is different. Every school is different depending on where you live. In one of the podcasts recently, we talked about how students from Alabama look at artwork with guns differently than those in the Northeast. Whether you're a city or rural, whether there's so many different factors that go into your classroom. Even every school is different. The culture of the school is different. So we're giving you these lessons with the understanding that you take them and use them to fit your students and fit your environment. But I do understand where this idea comes from, that it's too much, that my students can't do this. It's too advanced for them. I can see how people would say that, but I have to tell you, after years and years and years of teaching with works of art, my first art discussion with students was in 2000. I was doing a summer internship my freshman year of college, and it was at the Amarillo Museum of Art. I've been doing this for a really long time. And I can tell you that the teaching methods that we use at Art Class Curator work for all grades. I've taught elementary, I've taught middle, I've taught high, I've taught college, I've taught adults. I've taught every grade that there is. And, well, no, I haven't technically taught preschool, but I have parented preschoolers. So I guess there's that. Well, no, I've taught them in the museum. So never mind, I have. All right, anyway. So I've taught kids of all ages, students of all ages, and they can do this. And it doesn't even involve that much tailoring of the lesson, especially when it comes to discussion. You're going to ask the same types of questions. You're going to say, what's going on here? And they're going to answer it. And that's where the differences lie. The differences are in the answers and in the level of the conversation, not necessarily anything you do as the teacher when it comes to art discussion. When you ask what's going on here to a student in kinder, they're going to give you a different answer than the senior is going to give. Sometimes they might give you the same answer. And then you might not go as deeper with maybe like talking about gender or talking about things in their lives that are related. Your kinder is going to talk about their dog. There's always going to be someone that talks about their dog. But then, your middle and high school students can really dive deep into sort of social aspects of things. So, it doesn't require much different on your part. It's just a matter of letting the conversation and the discussions happen. So I do understand where the fear comes from, but I'm here to tell you that I think that this underestimating of our students is doing them a disservice. I think we underestimate what our students are capable of, but I also think we underestimate our students' interest in these sorts of lessons. That's kind of one of the biggest fears that I hear from teachers is they're worried that it's going to be crickets. They're going to put the artwork up. The kids are going to complain. They're not going to have anything to say. They're going to be bored. And I've said it so many times, and I'm sure if you've been a long time listener or reader, you've heard me say this and you'll hear me say it again, but it's just not true. When you put up an interesting artwork in front of a group of students of any age, of any race, of any socioeconomic status, of any type of person or student, they will find it interesting. They will have something to say. Because art is awesome, right? But also you're choosing artwork that's relevant to your students. You're choosing artwork that you think they're going to be interested in. If you need tips on this, you can go back to, I did an episode in the Beyond the Surface course. It's an email course that had a podcast component. The link for that is artclasscurator.com/surface, but you can head over to episode number 55, which is called Artworks They'll Relate To. That's part of the Beyond the Surface course, but if you're only wanting to talk about, what artworks to choose, that's the one you want to check out. But, you want them to be captivating, you want them to be communicative, you want them to be what we call the 4 C's: captivating, communicative, complex, and connected. If you've chosen an artwork that hits most of those C's, then the students cannot help but be interested in it. They cannot help but feel that spark and excitement about the image. We're just naturally drawn to images. We're naturally drawn to stories and images and narratives. All of that is taking place in one of these artworks. But I also want you to think beyond that. Think about your students' interest in art beyond just what's traditionally called visual art. So thinking about GIFs and memes and TikToks and Snapchats. Our students are interested in artworks, and it might be not art that we consider to be art. It's not necessarily one we would show typically in an art class, but they're used to analyzing artworks. They're used to looking at images and finding humor and meaning and story and symbolism in them. They know how to do this. And, we need to meet our students where they are, and that means choosing artworks that reflect their own lives, their own interests. And it means creating lessons that tap into the ways that they already interact with art and culture. So our students do care about art, and we just need to choose good artworks to show them. But honestly, even if you show them an artwork that's really one that is maybe older, that maybe you wouldn't find them to be excited about, they will find something to talk about in there. They are good at this. They are naturally wired to be good at this. I've seen it time and time again. Art discussion after art discussion after art discussion. They always have something to say. Even if it's about Monet's haystacks or Van Gogh's shoes, ones that aren't particularly super compelling, I think Van Gogh's shoes are compelling, but ones that maybe are not as outwardly exciting, the students do find ways in. And when you open up with that question, what's going on here? That's all you need. And then just let it flow, let it be exciting, let it be energetic. They can do this and they like to do it. You can take my word for it, but if you still don't believe me, I want you to go online. Well, it's summer, but if you're listening to this in the school year, go online, grab a photo of a Frida Kahlo painting. Anyone. I like 2 Fridas. I like the hummingbird necklace one. What is it called? Thorn necklace with hummingbird. Take one of those, show it to a group of kids, or your own child, or your neighbor, or your friend, and then ask them about it. I guarantee they're going to have something to say. Guarantee. Okay, so now we've gotten past the fear of our students not wanting to do this or not liking it. So the next part of this discussion is that the activities are too advanced and the work is too hard. And the thinking is too hard. I think it's not necessarily the work or any of that, but I think a lot of teachers are underestimating the level of your students' ability to do critical thinking and your students' ability to make connections with works of art. So I do understand where it comes from, because we think about these sorts of hard conversations that come up, and we think about the writing activities that we offer at Art Class Curator, the poetry writing, and that sort of thing. And you immediately get a little scared. So one example I'm going to give you. So I am taking this writing class. Spoiler alert, I'm working on a book. I'm really excited about writing that book. So it will come out sometime in the next, year or two. But in the writing class, she has had us write haikus a few times. And, I struggled with writing the haikus because one of them was very specific. We had to use certain words, and I found that to be a little bit challenging, tying those words together. And then the other time was a haiku about my book. And that one was easier because I was a little bit less restraints on it. But yeah, it was hard. And I've had teachers write haikus and they've struggled with it. And I've had students write haikus, and they honestly didn't struggle as much as the adults do. So, immediately you get into sort of a fear place when you're given that sort of an activity. And I did too. And I also was given a very short time period. And that was probably the biggest struggle for me, was I was given like 3 minutes. When I have my students write haikus, it's a good 20 plus minute activity. So it's a challenge, and you immediately like, oh no, that's too hard. But, I would argue that hard things are worth it, that it's okay that we're giving our students hard things. I mean, if you think about a math teacher, they're not shying away from math problems because they're too hard. They're teaching them how to solve the math problems. They're teaching them how to make it easier. They're going through it step by step. They're giving clear expectations. They are teaching it. So I think, I like to think about teaching art through the lens of, okay, well, how does a math teacher handle this? How does an English teacher handle this? Like, they have steps and processes and breaking things down in small chunks to make things a little bit easier. And we can look at art connection in these art appreciation lessons. I say art connection instead of art appreciation, as you probably know, but just another little point of that, that these art connection lessons are using skills that we can teach. So I would argue that although students are naturally interested in works of art, they're naturally interested in analyzing and talking about works of art, they're naturally excited about doing that we can teach them how to do it better. It is a skill to be developed. It is something that we can work on with them to make it easier. So maybe you see this haiku activity and you think, oh no, my kids can't handle that. Stop and think, well, what could I do to make it so they could handle it? So maybe we work up to it. We start with an art connection exercise that's just discussion. We talk about it, we discuss it, we point out the symbols, or, together we theorize, all of that stuff. And then maybe we write some adjectives about it. And then once they're accustomed to writing adjectives about it, maybe you do a more simple poem like a cinquain poem, which is a very structured poem that has, a noun on the first line, 2 adjectives on the second line, 3 verbs on the third line, a 4-word phrase on your fourth line, and then a noun again on your last line. You can get the template for a cinquain poem and a haiku poem and many other poems at artclasscurator.com/worksheets. We have a worksheet bundle with tons of these activities that work for almost any work of art. So, side note there. So they're simply looking at the picture or the painting or the sculpture, and they are coming up with words that describe it. So when I was teaching community college, I often did a kind of a little survey of art history, and I covered a lot of time periods in one class. I wouldn't necessarily do it this way anymore. Time has passed. I've changed my way of teaching since then. But in one class, I would do Rococo, neoclassical, romanticism, and realism all in one class. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I wasn't really too terribly interested in them knowing all the facts and details. I just wanted to give them like the vibe of that time, of the 17 and 1800s. And so I would have the students write poems in groups about paintings from those four movements. So there'd be a bunch of groups in the class. Each one is writing a poem about a different work of art, one from each of those four movements. So there was Fragonard's Swing. There was Oath of Horatii by Jacques-Louis David. There was Raft of the Medusa by Géricault. And the last one we did was The Angelus by Millet. And the students would write the poems, and then as we talked about each art movement, we introduced the art movement by having those groups present their poems. And what was so cool about that is that they were able to highlight the overall essence, vibe, mood, feeling, character of the art movement through their poem. So, their poem about the swing would be, sweetly swinging in love, stuff like that. And then I'm like, well, you know what? That's what Rococo was all about. It was about frivolous and fancy and fun and lightness and levity and lavishness. And you could really understand the art movement through the lens of that poem. It distilled it in such a beautiful way. And it's kind of funny looking back after I had this writing class that I talked about. We had to write a paragraph about our book, and then we had to write a haiku about our paragraph. And then we had to then write another paragraph about our book, but only about the haiku. So it was it was really fascinating to see how the second paragraph that I wrote was much more emotional, was much more clear about the heart of the book, whereas that first paragraph was a little bit more clinical. So, these sorts of activities allow us to look through different lenses, allow us to capture the emotion in different ways. And yes, they're going to be a little challenging for your students, but they're going to get so much out of it. And you, the teacher, can guide them through it. You can take them through a step by step. Oh, and before I get too far, since I just told that activity from the writing class, I do want to plug Heather Doyle Frazier's Compassionate Voice writing class. Very good. So, highly recommend. She loves a haiku. She does like haiku challenges and stuff on social media. So yeah, you can't just hand a haiku format to your sixth grader and say, write a haiku. You need to talk them through it. You need to work them through it. You need to talk about what is a syllable. You need to practice what syllables are. Even for my high school and college kids, I would have them write words first. They would write adjectives. They would write verbs. They would write nouns about the painting. And so they've gotten some words out. They've thought through. They've written some similes and metaphors even. So, they've thought through a bunch of words before they start to write their poem. And you can have them kind of skip that step and go straight to the syllables, but I've found, warming them up with some practiced words first works really well. So if you're worried that your students, that it is to something, the activity, the artwork, or just looking at art in general is too advanced for your students, remember that you can teach them. You can teach them how to do this. And practice might always make perfect. Your kids aren't going to be just writing haikus right away, or writing poems about art right away, but practice will always make better. And giving your students more time to look at the work of art, interpret what they see, they'll get used to doing that and they'll get better at it. And you'll see them improve in so many different areas. We've seen in studies that say that looking at art and talking about it improves a lot of things in students. It improves their critical thinking skills. It improves their empathy. It improves their tolerance. It improves their writing. It's worth doing and is worth teaching them how to do this. They can do it. You just have to help them along. Teach them. Another thing is, we can also help this process along by modeling curiosity. We can be passionate about it ourselves. We can create a classroom culture that thrives on different ideas and perspectives. I think one of the biggest barriers that I would say that you're going to face as you start to introduce more works of art in your students is if they're not used to it, if they haven't been doing it before, you're going to need to do some work to get buy-in. If you're starting the school year off with new students that you've never met before, you can go in right out of the gate and start showing them art, something that they get trained to do from day one. They realize this is a natural part of art class. They realize this is something that you're going to do regularly. But if you're kind of mid-semester or mid-year, or this is, you've had this, if you're maybe an elementary teacher and you've had the same students year after year, and suddenly now you're adding this in, your students are naturally going to be like, oh, wait, what? This is different. We haven't done this yet. Why aren't we drawing? Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? So it's something that you can build with them and grow with them on. And especially if this is something that you're not particularly used to doing, you're going to have to build up your own skills in leading these sorts of activities as well. No student or no teacher is going to hop out right out of the gate and be perfect at art connection, at art interpretation, at art analysis. It is a muscle to be developed. And going back to sort of our math, and going back to my math teacher analogy, another one I use all the time is, you give a calculus problem to a math teacher. They're not going to take one glance at the calculus problem and know the answer, but they know how to get the answer. They know the steps they need to take. They know that they have to do the PEMDAS. They know that they have to do, all the other math things that they have to do. And so they have confidence that they can figure out the answer because they know the skills. And so with you and your students, looking at a new work of art for the first time, you're not going to all of a sudden know everything about it just at first glance, but you're learning how to interpret it. You're learning how to connect with it. You're learning how to analyze it. You're learning how to interpret it. You're learning how to evaluate it. You're going through that process. And the more you do it, the better you will get at it. As a teacher, the more discussions you lead, the better you're going to get at leading discussions. The more artwork you connect with, the more artwork you interpret and experience, the more artworks, the better you are going to get at experiencing works of art. I know it sounds kind of silly to think about looking at works of art as a skill, but, it is. I look at art differently now than I did before I got my degree in art. I look at art differently now after I've spent a lot of time looking at it with students because I've seen it through fresh eyes. So it is something that we can do. It's just one of those things we have to get skilled at and we have to practice. And finally, for my last argument for this is too advanced, we at Art Class Curator are excited to announce that starting now, the Curated Connections Library has elementary lessons. So I've teased it in past episodes and told you about it. But we do have elementary lessons now at the Curated Connections Library, specific activities for your youngest kids. And on these elementary lessons, we have it split out K through 2 and 3 through 5. So even your kinders are going to find some amazing activities that are tailored to them. You're not going to have to modify it down anymore, that we've got those activities there for you in the membership. So the doors are opening really soon. The membership is opening on August the 5th, and we have a brand new site. We have new elementary lessons. We've added videos into a lot of the artwork, some more to come, and a lot of really exciting things happening over there in the membership. So that this is too advanced argument is done. When you're a teacher, one thing is certain: the lesson planning never ends. The Curated Connections Library is here to help with hundreds of art connection lessons and activities. Our signature Sparkworks lessons include everything you need to teach an artwork every single week. Each lesson features one diverse and captivating work of art and is complete with discussion questions, engaging activities to create deeper art connections, and related art project ideas. With unique worksheets and PowerPoint presentations, every lesson is classroom ready. Get your free SparkWorks lesson and take a break from lesson planning by going to artclasscurator.com/free lesson. Thank you so much for listening to the Art Class Curator podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes to help other teachers find us and hear these amazing art conversations and art teacher insights. Be sure to tune in next week for more art inspiration and curated conversations.